often in the world of nonviolent communication, there's a lot of focus on our individual choices and on how I can act and think in alignment with my values. And I love that. It's such a foundation. I'm also wanting to explore how do we use this process and this consciousness to interact with the systems and the cultures that we're a part of. Because individual choices never happen in a void. They always happen within a cultural context or a system in which those choices make sense. And when I'm talking about a system, I just like to think of it as behaviors that repeat themselves. In other words, what patterns of behaviors have we created that become the norm that we now call systems? And so I'm just talking about what's our usual habits as we go about the world. And because we repeat them, they seem to gain force and power. So I want to find ways that I can start engaging with those patterns of behavior that we have, particularly the ones that don't work for me, so that I can shift them in ways that they might start to work, and then really reinforce the patterns of behavior that I love, that I see that help us thrive in the world. And so I want to look at systems and our individual responses within those contexts. Because I found that if I don't consciously choose the systems in which I'm engaging, then I tend to go back to our default systems, the ones that my family gave me, the ones that my culture gave me, the ones that have developed within a certain group or organization. If we don't consciously choose those, then we go back to the default patterns, and I find myself often confused because my default pattern might be different than a different one that somebody else brought in, particularly if we come from different cultures. And so I'm also trusting that when we choose and create our systems together, that we can do that according to what we most value, according to the kind of world that we do want to live in. And so for some examples of some of the systems that I enjoy engaging in, one of my particular favorites is the justice system. Like, how do we engage with conflict? How do we engage with conflict, particularly in ways that help us not just damage, but also to restore harmony back to the relationships and back to the community? And so I want to look at questions like, do we have a retributive or punitive system like in the United States, where people are punished for their individual choices? Or do we have a restorative system where people come together and the focus is on restoring the relationships within the context of the system that might have impacted the choices that were made? So I love engaging with restorative system creation. How do we to engage in conflict in ways that we learn and grow from it and become more connected afterwards? Another system that I find really valuable to work with is a feedback system. In other words, how do we have within our relationships and within our organizations and our communities ways that we can learn from each other about what's really working for us and what's not working as well as we want? How do we create those systems in place so we can give each other feedback, so that we can receive feedback about what's working and not, and then learn and grow from that? Another system which I would love to see more of in the world, and I'm just starting to explore more of it myself, is what I would call an empathic system. Or maybe we could call it a support system. What do we have in our communities that really allows each individual to get the kind of support, the empathic support that they need in order to stay connected to what people really truly care about, to be heard, to be understood, to bring about, I see it as a foundation to heal trauma, to heal pain, to move forward, that the empathic system is so critical to that. I would love to see that really strongly built into our communities. Almost every community we have already has some sort of decision-making system about who gets to decide about what decisions. And I'm interested in exploring ways that we can make decisions where there is actually shared power, where those who are impacted by the decisions made are the ones who are involved in making the decisions. And I'm also interested in decision-making systems that are really efficient and effective. And so that's one of the pieces that I love to explore. How do we make decisions in ways where all the voices that are impacted matter and have influence? And how do we also do that in a way that's clear and that has the effectiveness we want? And then in many of the social systems that we're engaged in, there's usually a governance decision. How do we want to govern ourselves? Do we want to govern with a sense of shared power? Do we want to have it in a place where there's power over, where few people are making decisions for others? And how do we get the work done that really supports a world that we want to live in, a world that works for all? So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions about what I mean by systems, or any particular systems that you're looking at that you would like to engage with directly.
It's Aldo. Can
Great.
you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Aldo.
Okay. I answer to your second question. Two systems I'm interested in are money, how our money works, and relationship, like couple relationship, and how they work.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't talk about the economic systems. I'm super curious about that. Is how do we actually use our resources in ways that they go where the need is? How do we decide how resources are generated and how they're distributed? And what creative ways can we use to come up with something different than what we've got? Does that resonate with the area that you're interested in?
Yes.
Yeah, love that. And then the area of relationships, I think you said particularly like between couples, like in a partnership or intimate relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I might think of those too as family systems, defining family in so many different ways. It's where do we go to for our sense of home and belonging and family? How do we make those systems places where there's a lot of support? I'm really excited about the idea that relationships are held in community so that there's support for everybody involved in them. And I see that as a really important part of building really robust empathic systems and feedback systems and restorative systems. I'm curious how you feel hearing that.
I'm missing it a lot. And I see around me that it doesn't happen. That couples are held in the community as long as everything goes well. And when problems arise, they are often alone.
Does anybody else on the call also share that sense? You can just raise your hand, or if you've got your video on, or write into the chat. Is there a longing on your part to have communities that support relationships? seen a lot of the videos turned off, so that request probably isn't very useful. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you, Aldo. I'm sharing that longing too, just how delicious life could be. It brings me back to my motivation of what kind of world can we create that would be a beautiful world where there are systems set up for people to get support. The longing and the missing gets me connected to what I do want. Hanker, anybody else?
Yeah, well, I would be quite curious to find out more about the feedback system that you mentioned, like how we can actually learn, like, or how we can take the most from the feedback of others, and how can we get, like, give other people, let's say, the most valuable feedback.
Great, I love that question. I've been working with people who want to become certified trainers with the Center for Nonviolent Communication for, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years. And in our community, feedback is really important because it gives us a sense of how we're doing on our path to growth and living in the way that we want. And so we've developed a feedback system that's what we call 360-degree feedback, meaning that the first piece is I want to be able to explore myself. I want to do a lot of reflection on how I see myself living in alignment with the values or the skills that I want feedback on. So we're really clear about what the feedback is about. There are certain qualities we would like to see in each other and in ourselves. So as I reflect on myself, I then share that with the group. Here's how I see myself. Here are the places that feel easy and fluid. And here are the places where I'm struggling. And here's what I'm imagining is difficult for you in the way I respond, and here's what I'm imagining might be easy. So it's just my perspective is the first place of the feedback. And then the community, either informally or formally, we also gather in circles where we focus just on one person. Then the community reflects back their experience of how a person is living the qualities that we're talking about. And what's important for me on feedback is to understand the motivation is that I'm wanting to give feedback so that we can learn and grow together. It's not so that I can judge and criticize someone. And what helps me receive feedback is knowing that whenever somebody is talking, they're only talking about their own experience. It's really not about me, even if I'm the content. And so somebody is gifting me with their experience of me. It's precious. It's very precious. And so we share with each other what our experiences are of maybe our sense of empathic presence, our sense of somebody really speaking authentically and honestly, the sense of if there's congruence in how we share certain ideas, and the sense of the willingness and capacity of someone to engage with conflict in a way that holds everybody with care. Whatever it is, we share our experiences of that to grow together. And that's where the 360-degree feedback is. We start gleaning multiple perspectives, because sometimes somebody says, Kathleen, the way that you experience yourself is exactly the way I experience you. That really feels in alignment. And somebody else will say, wow, that's completely different than how I experience you. You think you're very eloquent and can speak well. Well, I don't understand a thing that you say. And so getting the different experiences helps build the whole picture. It helps me see the different parts of the system and different ways that I impact and influence the world around me. After we shared that, then we search for ways, request ways that we can move forward now that we have that information, where are the places that we want to celebrate? Because we're actually living in the kind of world we want to live in. And where are the places that we want to adjust and change, do something different so that both of us or all of us in the group can experience more ease and more of what we want? So hopefully that feedback is on an ongoing basis, that people do that actually in the moments when they experience conflict or tension or celebration, but also to really build in times when we pause and we just focus on feedback as a time of reflection for the whole system, not just individuals, but also the whole system. So I'm curious if that gave you some of the information you were looking for. Hanka, that question.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I'm curious also, does that feel inspiring or compelling to you?
Absolutely, yes. And I think I will be, well, like really curious to find out more and maybe just like engage more in like exploring this a little bit. Yeah,
thanks. I do want to say that I realize that I speak now with a lot of excitement about feedback systems because I've spent several years engaged in them, but I was terrified of them because feedback, at least in my experience in my life, has often been about people judging me and people criticizing me. And so I've had to learn to transform that, even when the words come with labels and judgments, to transform that to just hearing what's underneath other people's experience so that I can actually learn from their feedback, no matter how it comes at me. And also learning ways to really engage in feedback with care that holds each of our well-being and the intention to learn and grow together, the intention to be more connected at the end of it. So it's a big journey to go from being terrified of feedback to actually creating enough trust within the system where feedback is welcomed and celebrated. Yeah, it's a journey. Thanks.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on any particular systems or places that you want to explore?
I'd like to elaborate a little bit on what I touched on when I last spoke.
Great.
So in the industry that I'm in, there's of course the development of an actual product or service and taking the effort that is actually useful for society and people. But there's actually much bigger things going on because a lot of the projects I'm in are about technology, and I really see issues with technology, with basically technologically mediated communication. So when there isn't the face-to-face and they're working together every day or being together every day. And I see lots of impacts at an individual and team level, and then going out to a social level about people basically getting disconnected from each other through these wonderful technologies that we have. And that's a big concern of mine, actually. So the impact of these technological systems on communication between people. And another part of our industry is we've kind of been a bit hyped because of Apple, and there's this thing called design thinking, which is pretty similar to NVC, you know. It's about understanding what is going on and then looking at how to improve it. And companies as well as governments are now coming to our industry and asking us actually for advice on how to change their processes, how to change the way that they interact with their stakeholders and customers. So like a government interacting with citizens. And I see that our industry now has even more power than before to influence things. And with that comes a lot of responsibility in how can we actually shape things so that they are, in the end, the changes that we make are actually good for society. So that's a lot, I know. And I can't take it all in at once myself, but these are things I can see that are really going on in my industry and how it's affecting the world.
Hmm. Yeah, so to make sure that I love how much you brought to the table, because they're big meta concerns in terms of, so if I'm getting it, that there's the creating the product, but also the impact of the product and the amount of power that it has in people's lives, just in terms of their relations with each other. Are they connected or more connected? And also, as we pour our resources into design and into big government projects, what are the impacts on those people? How do we design those in a way? Particular people are coming to you and to your team to how do you influence the design so that on the other end, people's lives are actually a lot better. Like the responsibility, the sheer weight of that, I imagine, is huge. Am I getting some of the meta?
Yes, and the thing is, when you bring in a technology, you don't just bring in a technology, you actually impact the entire system because you change the process. So, yeah. If you change the way a government interacts with its citizens, you really impact a lot of things, people who aren't connected, those kind of things. Because for example, I've lived in Finland, and there you've got almost 100% mobile phone connection. So people don't think about what happens when you don't have it, you know? Mm-hmm. These can seem small, but they can be very big.
Yeah. So for me, that's a key piece of systems. A key piece of the consciousness of nonviolent communication is that we're interdependent. Everything we do on the planet is interdependent. I go into prisons a lot, and schools and corporations, and sometimes I bring a ball of mine that it kind of looks like this, and it expands and grows. And if you pull just on one piece, the whole ball, I'm trying to get this in the picture, the whole ball grows. And if you push on one piece, the whole ball collapses. And so it's both terrifying to think that we have so much influence and power at certain leverage points in the system. And it could also give that inspiration to, I think what Aldo talked about at the beginning of, I want to know that what I do has influence. And sometimes it seems we don't. So I really want to invite us to consider that when we impact one part of the system, it influences and impacts the whole system. And when I went to Switzerland in 2005 with Marshall Rosenberg, the founder of this work, and we spent a couple of weeks together with, I think it was 55 people from 21 different countries. And one of the first things he said when we got there, much to my disappointment, was he said, there's no such thing as NVC. Like, as soon as we start thinking that there is such a thing as NVC, then we've lost what it's about. And it's about being connected to what really matters to us in life, connected to our life energy, connected to our values. So as soon as we call it a thing, it becomes one step away from that. But he said, if there was such a thing as NVC, it would consist of five different elements that are all interrelated. And one of those, which is the most important, is the consciousness, which I think we've just been talking to. The consciousness of this work, which is critical, and it's at the heart of social change for me, is that we're interdependent. We don't exist on our own. We can't function on our own. That we need to pay attention to the relationships and the impacts. That we're interdependent. And another part of the consciousness is to really create that sense of natural giving. That sense that we give out of the joy of giving and not to avoid punishment or in hopes of reward. That natural giving and flow that happens when we're thriving and there's trust built, and we're giving because we love to give to one another. And then a third part of the consciousness is what we call power with, or shared power. How do we actually create a world where we all influence each other? We're open to the influence of each other, In other words, there's so much trust built that everyone gets to show up with their gifts. And so that for him was like the main part, the heart and soul of nonviolent communication, is that kind of consciousness, that framework. And that's what I would want to have in our awareness of social change, is that we can't do anything without impacting the whole system. And I want to impact the system in a way that actually invites power with. The second piece of what he shared, the second element, if there was such a thing called nonviolent communication, the second element would be language. Because language is a software for our thoughts. And so I want to use a language that's consistent with the consciousness. So if I have a language that's filled with labels and diagnosis and analysis and blame, then I want to shift that in a way that where I use a language that speaks to what I most care about, where I use a language that speaks to how I feel, that what I value. And then a third element, he says, we need to pay attention to our thinking, to our thoughts. Because the thoughts are the filters. We filter the world through our thoughts. And so I want to make sure that my thinking is congruent with the consciousness of interdependence. If I'm holding some kind of core belief that I'm alone in the world, I'm separate, then it's not consistent with the consciousness. And I really want to look at that thinking and give it some empathy and give it some attention until I can bring it into alignment. And a fourth part of what nonviolent communication would be the communication that happens non-verbally or beyond words, beyond the language. Like to really start to get some understanding of all the different ways that we communicate and interact with one another. And we have some amazing colleagues in the field who are really looking at the social interactions, the interpersonal neurobiology, the sense of how do we learn to be in social settings together, and how does that impact the way we communicate with each other. And then the last piece, which I really want to speak to what you're saying, Ming, is that it's about how we use power. I really, really need to look at how I use power in the world. How do I invite people to be influenced to join me in creating the kind of world that I want? And this is a key element for me when it comes to social change. How do we use power? So to bring all of this back around to what you're saying is I'm wanting to be so connected to what I value in the world, so connected to what I might call needs or the life energy that matters. So connected to things like safety, harmony, creativity, health, well-being, people having power and choice. If I'm connected to those things, really deeply connected, then I trust that I'm going to use power in a way that will be in service to those. That I will use my language in a way. I'll shift my thinking in a way that will be in service to those. And so that's where I see NVC being critical in social change. Is I want to bring that consciousness and that awareness into those teams who are working with technology, into the teams that are working with restorative justice, into the environmental and farming communities. Is how can we all thrive and have that be the basis of how we move forward? So I'll stop there. I'm noticing my energy going up and my words going faster. And let me check Ming first with you to see, did that also speak to some of the things that you're exploring?
Yeah, especially maybe the last point about helping others actually to be aware of the power and the impacts that they're having with what they're doing, the work that they're doing. And because we're working at this meta level as well, which is shaping how other people decide to do things or do decision making. Yeah. Thank you.
And that's where I want a really robust restorative system so that when conflicts arise, we can actually address them in ways that are more likely to meet more people's needs. I want a really robust feedback system if I'm doing something so that the feedback can be coming along at all points of the way and what's working and what's not. So that's why those systems really support that vision that you're holding. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'd love to open it up and see if anything has come up for anybody else on the call in relation to what we've been talking about.
So if you hear me, I'm Martin. I would like to follow up on what you just said about how basically our actions are connected with the actions of others. And I see this happening on the local level and feel that lots of things can happen, but on the other hand, I feel really daunted by the big issues. So say, political systems, how the multinationals work, and so on. And basically, this to me is demotivation because I feel that I'm too of a small being to do something with that, right? So I wonder how you are dealing with this.
Martin, I love the question because I feel so much resonance with you. I feel hopeful in the small interactions I have, and I feel overwhelmed much of the time by how much pain and harm there is in the world, and I don't know where to engage and how to intervene. So for me, the first step is empathy, empathy, empathy. I need to do a lot of grief work.
Yeah.
I grieve a lot. Like I go into prisons and I go into schools, and then I'm in the United States where Donald Trump is going to be.
This is exactly where I'm going.
Yeah, just saying that. Like I'm sweating. I'm embarrassed. I'm like, wow. Now what? I want to do the grief work. Like, how could it be that there's even this level of thinking on the planet, this level of separation? I want to allow myself to fully feel the fear and the terror that comes up around it. Yeah. The sense of helplessness, powerlessness that I have. I want to actually feel that. I want to be surrounded by my community, because what happens to me in grief is if I allow myself to feel it, I then get deeply connected to what I care about, which is this deep respect for human dignity for all life on the planet, and this sense of wanting safety for every single person on the planet. And I get really connected to how I believe that if there's one person on the planet that doesn't feel safe, none of us feel safe.
Yeah.
So connected to those pieces. And then I'm noticing, okay, I'm not sweating anymore. Just even in saying that out loud, I'm noticing that I'm starting to breathe a little better. Like I feel juiced and motivated by that vision, by the power of that vision. Like I actually want to create safety for all people. I want everybody on the planet to be heard for the depth of their pain. And when I do that, then I start to actually move and act in ways that start shifting it in my sphere of influence. So all I can really do right now is in my sphere of influence, but I want to challenge myself to not think that that sphere of influence is tiny. Because right now on this call, we've got people from all over the world who care about this. That seems massive and powerful to me. Like we get to do this now. I wasn't doing this years ago, but we're doing it now. And when we started hearing all the different things that the places where you're trying to create a family in that little living room that you're sitting in, a family where people thrive and where there's respect and where there's safety and there's love, and that matters so much on the planet. And we've got other people who are trying to work with agriculture and farmers in the environment right now. And then there's other people on the call maybe that are working with schools, and some of us working with prisons. And it's amazing to me how just coming together to get connected to what we care about and share ideas about how we can do it, we start acting in ways all over the planet that I'm hoping will change our systems. I'm seeing it now. So, Marta, let me ask you, I don't know what kind of answer you were hoping for, expecting, but how was that for you?
No, thank you very much. It was empowering and reassuring. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Yeah, I love keeping myself alive and not shutting down and becoming a robot. That gives me hope. Anything else that's bubbling up for anyone?
Yes, it's Aldo again. I just would like to add something for Martin, because what he said triggered something in me, and well, I also experienced this feeling, of course. And one thing that helps me is to think that there is no such a thing like me against the world, which is the root of this desperation, of this thinking I can't change the world, but it's not me trying to change the world, it's the world changing itself, because we are interconnected, because I'm the world. So if there is a desire for changing in me, it's a sign that the world is already changing, because I'm part of it. So this idea of, or better, get rid of this idea I'm separated for the world has been very helpful for me.
I love it. So you experience that interconnection, don't isolate yourself from that. And that gives you hope and strength, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Yeah. You're also speaking to one of the key places in this nonviolent communication process is there's a basic assumption that for every single person on the planet, we share the same life qualities. We share the same needs. We share the same values. And if I can trust that, it keeps me connected. And knowing that it's not me versus someone else or me versus the world, is that if I can hang on to that assumption that we all share these same life qualities, these same needs, and that if I can just connect to that life quality in you, or into that life quality in Donald Trump, into that life quality in me, that somehow we're going to go there together. And the place where we get into conflict is always on the level of strategies and how do we really try to satisfy those life qualities. Like if I want safety, I might choose a strategy of trying to ban Muslims from coming into the United States. Now, I too have that need for safety, but I feel terrified about the strategy of trying to ban Muslims from coming into the United States. And so the conflict is on the level of strategy. It's not on the level of the need. And key, I think I spoke to this at the beginning, one of the most important things that I can do is to really stay aware when I start thinking somebody's crazy, somebody is insane. I start labeling and judging because I've lost touch with the humanity of that person or my own. But when I can stay connected to the need for safety, which I think is huge on the planet right now, that I share that. We have common humanity. We're all on the same team. Then I could start to have some conversations and dialogue about the strategies that we're choosing. Because I would love to have some conversation about the strategy of banning Muslims is actually, in my opinion, going to make us less safe. I'm not in conflict with the desire for safety. I'm in conflict with the strategies. And if I could really empathize and get on the same page but that we both want safety. I want safety for everybody in the world. Let's look at some strategies that will really allow that to happen. That's where the dialogue softens. That's where the defenses start to go down. That's where the creativity starts to emerge in social change conversations. Is once somebody trusts that I see the beauty behind whatever it is that they're doing, even if I don't agree with how they're doing it. That's the hope I hold in the power of our interdependence, is that that's where we can connect and start to get on the same page and look at the problems together.
I have a small comment to it. So,
yes, go ahead.
basically what you're saying sounds to me a lot like exactly Marshall's books, and what I find inspiring and yet very hard to do is that to actually find out what is that need that connects, say, us two, right? So right now when we were speaking about banning Muslims and the need for safety, I see it, right? But when someone says banning Muslims, for me, the safety will not come right away, right? And this is, I think, where I and maybe many of us need training, because I'm not able simply to identify these things very quickly.
Yeah, thank you. Me too. It's a constant everyday training. And believe me, as soon as I heard that, that was not the first thought in my mind. Oh, Donald Trump needs safety. It's the process that I went through to get there. There's a process of, I think this has been recorded. I don't know if I want to say all this out loud, but the thinking in my head was actually more like, this is crazy, this is nuts, this is going to end the world right now if we go down this, How could this be? I can't believe somebody could think that. So my reaction and my thinking was what I had access to first. Mm-hmm. And I probably always will. And then I could pay attention to, wow, how does my body feel in the midst of that? I was tight. I felt terrified. I really felt scared. I felt almost panicky. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to respond in a way at that point. And so then after noticing just how I'm feeling, I start to tune in. I put my attention to what is it that I care about that's creating this amount of response in me. And I care about a world where there's human dignity for all. I care about a world where we work together, we collaborate. I care about safety for all people. There's so many layers, and that's how I train myself to become. It's a process. It's a really kind of clear. I rely on that process for myself at moments when I'm particularly triggered and upset. To bring my attention back to what it is that I care about. To bring my attention back to needs. Because that's where my power is. And so once I got connected to me, like, oh yeah, I want this, then nature naturally allows me to start to be curious about somebody else. Mm-hmm. And then at that point, I can start looking at, okay, I know this assumption in my head is that everything somebody says or that they do is an attempt to meet a need. Like, I'm going to trust that assumption. I'm going to try to crack the code, break the secret code. When Donald Trump says that, what could he possibly be wanting? Is it that he wants more power in the world? And if he had more power in the world, what would that give him? Would it give him a sense of knowing he's alive and that he matters? Does he want to protect Americans? So does he want safety? Is that what he's trying to look for? Is he saying that because he wants some empathy and some understanding for his own personal pain in relation to something that might have happened cross-culturally? My guess is that most of what's happening that's tragic in the world is because we want empathy and understanding for the pain we've experienced because there's so much trauma right now. So my guess is that empathy is always one of the motivating factors. and safety is usually close behind. And wanting power in my own world, wanting to be able to choose how I live my life is another huge need. So often I just get those three needs right up front. I start with those. And if none of those land, I'll keep going on to others. But is that useful? There's a really clear process I go through to focus myself on that. And we'll be exploring that, working with that a lot during the IIT.
No, it's super useful. What I find interesting to think of is if our kids or the new generation is raised in a way that this, he's going to kill the world, it doesn't even come. And the world would be a perfect place to live, right? I don't know whether this is possible, but because all of us are raised in the way that we are first freak out, and then we try to find out. But I just wonder whether we can teach our kids to think differently right away from the beginning.
Well, let's find out. Let's do it.
Well, then the parents have to master it first, right?
I'd like to share with you if there's an opportunity here about kids. Is that okay?
Please do. I'd love to hear it.
So I have a 5-year-old son, and I've been more self-aware since a few months after he was born, and I've also been thinking exactly about this and focusing a lot on how I validate his feelings and show him how I'm seeing the world as well. And I already see things that are different in the way I was brought up and in my old behaviours. Like I try to encourage his curiosity in him, for example. So when we see things or experience things together that maybe in my old life I would have found disgusting or horrible, I've changed my language and I've said, well, that's interesting. I wonder what's going on there. And he's doing the same. He actually has very little disgust. I thought disgust was one of those basic things. And of course he has reactions of fear to certain situations, which I think are very in the primitive brain, and I don't think we can not have them. But yeah, I just wanted to share that with you. It's possible.
Yeah, it sounds like very hopeful, and you're seeing when you shift that it impacts your child too. Yeah, I want to keep the hope going. It keeps me getting up every morning, and based on the brain research that I've been exposed to, it seems like we can, even if we've been involved in old patterns. This is what gives me a lot of hope for social change, is that we actually continue to grow and change throughout our lifetime. And so because of that, if I shift and change and put my focus onto what do we care about here in the group, I can invite other people into that same space. I can encourage them to also put their attention there and influence the behavior of others as we shift and we grow and we change. So I do think even if we're in systems where there's a lot of reaction and old patterns that aren't working for us, that there's a lot of hope for us to do something different, to consciously choose and grow and change, and that we change the neural networks in our brains. And I'm also really excited about hearing about, your relationship with your son, that our children, when they have that trust built in, they have the connection, they know that parents are going to respond in ways, and they develop those secure attachments with parents, like their world is different. They just respond differently. And really, I am imagining will be huge lights in the world for how we go about creating a world for the next generation. So thank you to all of you who are living in love and with this process with your children. I'm really wishing we were all in the same room right now. I just got to say that. It's really in my system. I'm noticing I'm leaning in. I'm trying to reach out physically for you. I have so much curiosity on what's going on with each of you, and I don't have access to that here. So I'm wondering about I would love to hear if there's people who haven't spoken yet, just so I have more connection with where you are and how this call is landing for you right now. If there's anybody willing to either speak that hasn't spoken or to write it into the chat window if you're more comfortable with that, I would love to pause and do that.
Well, there was a lot of interesting things that were said, and it gave me much more hope, including the Donald Trump. You know, I realized how scared I am, but there are so many things I'm scared about. It's one big mess of emotion each day, you know, going on with the news and stuff, and the things you talked about gave me a bit more clue. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for naming just, wow, how big and how huge it is to live in the world where we have access to news. And in your field where you're working, I'm sure you see the consequences, the huge consequences every day. And you work with just how much impact that would have on our bodies, on our nervous systems, on our hearts. So thank you for naming that. I don't think we've talked about it to the extent. I really appreciate that. And I'm really want to invite each one of us to make sure that we have 2, 3, 4, 70 people that are in our communities that we can reach out to so that we have that community of support. Just somebody to hear that, wow, I feel scared right now. It seems so big, I don't know what to do. Just to have that makes such a difference. I don't know how to move forward without community and support, my beloved companions. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that, Tamara. Anyone else want to share how you are right now? Or if there's another question that you have, it looks like we have about 15 minutes if I'm tracking the time. All right. Any questions you have for the remaining time or how you are right now?
I have just a quick one. When we were discussing how you deal with the first shocks, right? You said that you're looking at, you have your 3 needs that these people, well, your first 3 guesses, right? One of them is safety, one of them is empathy that these people need, and the third one I missed.
Oh, what did I say? I probably said choice, like choice or autonomy, like power in my world.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
But a fourth one, if I were to add to that, would be like friendship, like companionship, connection.
Yeah.
To belong.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. It was one of the ways that I wanted to learn this work so badly. And my kids were very young at the time. And I was also a music conductor, and I was working in schools a little bit. And my life was really busy, and I thought, how am I going to learn this? I don't know. And so I started just trying to simplify. I knew that what I needed to do was to have a need vocabulary. I needed to learn that language, become fluent in needs, become fluent in what I care about. And so because my kids were young and I was working in their classes, and so I would be working with kids that were like between 4 and 8. I just picked 3 needs that would come up. You know, kids, I want that ball. Well, that's probably a need for choice, or so-and-so's mean, so the need for kindness or safety. And so I would just pick like those 3 needs, and I would usually say, so are you just wanting to choose now? Or you want to know that you're safe? And 90% of the time, at least, they would go, yeah. And that was my connection. So it's like, wow. But if I would have had a list of 100 needs, choosing from that, it would have been hard for me to learn. So in a situation where I might be more a professional situation or a business, where there's a lot of attention to, you know, maybe profits and wanting to protect my territory, I would maybe want to choose a I'm wondering if people are wanting to protect their resources. Wondering if people are wanting. My mind just went blank, but I'm wondering if they're really wanting to have power in their world. And I'm wondering if they're wanting understanding for the context, the difficulties that they're in. Yeah, I might have a list of like 5 that I would bring into that context to start weaving into my conversations so that I can start building connections and keep the learning simple for myself. I would also just practice. So if I'm standing in line waiting to buy my groceries, I would listen in on conversations and just in my mind, I would translate. So I wonder if that person is wanting to be understood for how hard the day was, or I'm wondering if that person's wanting ease right now, or I wonder if that person's wanting respect. Or I wonder if that person's worried about their resources. I would also read like bumper stickers that were on cars, and I would translate those, and I would listen to the news, and I would translate that all in my head, just to practice. And then I also had people that I specifically practiced with, my empathy buddies, a practice group that I would go to so that people were helping support me with the language, and I listened to Marshall Rosenberg's CDs over and over and over and over when I was like in the car, just so the language would start to fit in, and I can hear how he would empathize with people in all different situations. And I just learned by listening. That was my process. And just lots of patience. I set myself a goal that if I could empathize with one person one time during the day, it was a good day. Rather than thinking I had to empathize with everybody all the time, because that still doesn't happen.
Thank you.
So could I just do it once today?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. Any other questions or?
Yeah, there is one from Ness. I hope I didn't notice it too late. So let me see the chat. So Ness is writing, "Hi all. I would love to be able to spread this consciousness. Some people are not prepared for that. So I'm wondering, how are you doing that yourself?" Ness is writing, people are, when I share what Marshall is doing, people are not receptive.
Ah. Okay, I love this question. It's a huge exploration of mine. I think I'm coming to the belief that it's living the consciousness, and I'm not trying to actually share it, unless it's like a situation like this where people say, I want to learn NVC and it's a call. But for me, it's when somebody says something and I just do it. I just empathize with them. I try to meet people where they are until we get a clear understanding where there's some connection. And then I ask if they're ready to hear what's important to me. If there's some willingness on their part to explore another option, that could work. It's actually the living it. And then I find that people say, wow, I like the way that you talk, or I like the dialogue. I like it when you're in our meeting. I wish we would have found out about 5 years ago. That's when people start noticing that there's something different happening. And then they ask, how I got there. Or I could say, well, what I'm doing is something really specific I think we could all be doing for each other in this meeting. I would love to see our meetings where we slow down and after somebody talks, that we figure out what's most important to them before we move on. So then I could start building in little pieces into how we're living it. And that tends to build trust with people, because in my experience, people are tired of me coming in, this is the old me, coming in and saying, oh, we got to change, we have to do something different. And they're like, yeah, Kathleen. And so for me, it's the living it and then building the trust that invites people to want to hear what I have to say. Is that usefulness? That was a lot of words on my part.
The answer was hard to understand. Some interception.
Okay. Great. The essence is, for me, living the process with people so they experience it is more important than sharing it formally. I've really enjoyed your questions, and I have a sense of having friends and companions overseas now. I hope that that's mutual. And I would love to end, I'm torn between these two quotes. I think I will end with a quote by Arundhati Roy.
Mm-hmm.
It's, another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, if you listen carefully, you can hear her breathing.